Hello. So this is going to be chapter 12 for organizational behavior. We're going to be hopefully getting back to live classes, either on Zoom or some other modality. So we'll figure something out. But in the meantime, the classes that were already canceled, I wanted to make sure that you had the materials, at least as just a review of the PowerPoint so that you can keep it in your study guide. Hopefully, the rest of the semester is going to be digital. So we're going to have to figure out how to participate. If some of you do not have the access to do a live classroom experience online, let me know and we'll try to come up with some other solution. I think most people should be able to get into WebEx or Zoom or whatever it is on Moodle that they may have available. I've done about 5 chapters today, so I'm probably more sick of my own voice than you probably are, but this is just going to be a review. It's about a half an hour, so we'll get through chapter 12. So we're going to pick up at chapter 12. This will be on slide 23 of the PowerPoint that was attached to Moodle. I know that the Bunker Hill version of the book may have some differences with the main book, and I know that from semester to semester it changes from time to time. If it happens to be chapter 13 or 14, just double check. Slide 24 talks about team processes. This is basically the things that a team does in order to achieve its objectives at the end. So characteristics of a team, like the diversity that we talked about in chapter 11, and task interdependence and team size, they affect how the processes of the teams work out. If you have a good process and you've got the right people with the right size team, and they are interdependent on one another, then it will help the processes function efficiently. If the processes in place are working well, then the effectiveness of the team will be enhanced as well. Slide 25. Process gain is the benefit of having a synergistic team work together cohesively to create more output than you could get from individuals alone. Again, we talked about that a little bit in chapter 11. Process loss is the converse of that, where you actually have less production than you might from the individual members. This is usually with a poorly designed or poorly managed team, or a team with processes in place that aren't particularly geared to achieve the objective that it is set forth to do. Slide 26 has the causes of process loss. The main reasons behind process loss is a lack of coordination. If the members of the team don't understand what they need to do in order to get things done, if they don't know their roles, if there's role ambiguity, or they just don't work cohesively together, the process that would create output to get the deliverable at the end of it will be blocked. So when they're talking about production blocking, it's because people aren't sharing information or they don't have access to information because they're not working together properly. Motivational loss can come from something called social loafing. If you're at work and you're spending all day on the internet, or you're not really paying attention in meetings and you're not contributing, that's known as social loafing. That's a bigger problem with bigger teams. You've got 10 or 12 people, 1 or 2 of them not paying attention and not contributing might not be as noticeable or as impactful as if you had a smaller group of people, say 3 or 4 or 5. You would notice it if a couple of people weren't working particularly well. The problem with social loafing and motivation is that the performing members of the team see what's going on, and if there aren't consequences for it, they may lose their commitment to the team, resulting in being demotivated. And then no matter how good your process is or how good the ideas were, if people aren't working together well because of that, it's not going to have a successful outcome. Slide 27 is talking about the types of processes that you can employ, creative behavior, decision-making, and boundary spanning. So we'll get to that in a little bit more detail in further slides. Brainstorming is something that teams typically use when they're working together to come up with ideas, new ideas, to be creative. It's usually a good thing, but it can also be a bad thing. If people just sit around throwing ideas off the wall and nobody's tracking what's going on, it can be wasteful in terms of time and effort. So here's a to-do list and what not to do. Have a focus, know what you're supposed to be doing, have rules that are in place so that people understand what is appropriate, what is not appropriate. It's okay to be less serious. I don't know if they have to be necessarily playful rules, but they need to be some kind of rules that could encourage debate, let people bring up ideas, that old saying that there's no stupid ideas, etc. When you come up with ideas, I've actually been in brainstorming sessions where we've sat in a room for 4 or 5 hours, and everybody came up with as many ideas as they could about how to fix a particular problem or how to address a project that was being planned. And we had a pad of sticky notes. Everybody would write their idea on it. We'd put it up on the wall. We'd group them according to categories. What type of idea was it affecting in terms of the overall goal of the project that the team is working on. You then rate the ideas and figure out which ones were the best. Some of them would drop, some of them wouldn't. The whole idea of this, though, in the what to do section here is to make sure that you are producing ideas, but you're not just going around in circles and just coming up with goofy ideas. The idea here is to have a process in place so that you can take advantage of the creation that comes from the brainstorming session. What you shouldn't do is have somebody in a position of authority do all the talking. If somebody comes up right away and says, this is what I think we should do, and that person is a senior manager, then it's very unlikely that you're going to get creative ideas because people will have concerns about their status, and if they say something, they may be perceived as being contrary to what the boss wants. You don't necessarily want to give everybody a turn and force them to come up with something. You may have one idea, and the person next to you may have 10, but if you just continually go around the room, it's not really going to contribute to the best of the group's ability. Somebody may be more creative than someone else because of the topic, or it could just be that they're not particularly willing to participate. It's good to facilitate, but you don't necessarily have to make everybody come up with 10 ideas because that's not how it works. You shouldn't only include experts in a brainstorming session as well. Sometimes experts, as we talked about in critical thinking, they're good at what they do, but they don't necessarily look at a particular problem from a counterpoint or a viewpoint outside of what they already know. Someone who is a layperson who doesn't have expert training in something could come up with a great idea that an expert hasn't necessarily thought of. Just like you don't want the boss to kind of dominate, you also don't want an expert to say, hey, I'm an expert, this is what we should do, because then it will stifle contributions from other members of the team. You don't always want to go off site. It's not a bad idea to break the trend of just being stuck in the same office all the time. If you could go someplace else, out in the country, go to a restaurant, whatever it is, even just another location of the different conference room, it may help create a situation where people feel more ambitious and can contribute more to it. I agree that you shouldn't limit the silly stuff, as it says on the slide, but you also don't want it to be happy hour. You want to be able to come up with ideas. It's okay to have it as an informal attitude to be able to encourage creativity, but there should be some allowance for it, but it shouldn't be just a joke a minute. You don't want to write down everything, but you certainly do want to write down the key ideas. So again, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. It says don't write down everything. That doesn't mean don't write down anything. So you still want to be able to process it. Like I said, we did sticky notes. You can flesh out the good ideas later, but you want to at least capture what the idea and the concept was so that you could come back and revisit it, and then you would actually flesh it out a little bit more. Decision-making is the topic on slide 29 when you're in a group and you're in a team or just an organization in general. We talked about in critical thinking that you can't really make a good decision if you don't have information or if you don't have good information. So you have to have the information about what you're supposed to be doing so that you can make a decision. If you're lacking that decision, you're not going to have an informed decision, and therefore it won't be a very strong decision. Staff validity is a way to gauge how much people have contributed to the process of making decisions. If you've got an employee that always makes good recommendations, they're probably following a good process, they're limiting their bias, they're using critical thinking. But if you have someone else that isn't necessarily doing a very good job of making recommendations, they don't work when you go back and review, then you might want to either limit the amount that they have to do with making decisions or giving input for decisions, or you could just talk to them to try to find out why are they not as successful as other people. It could be that they need some training. It could be that you just have to inform them about techniques that could be leading to a more successful recommendation in the future. A hierarchy is basically the design, the chain of command. So your boss is at the top of the chain. If you're the assistant, you're second, third, fourth, fifth. Hierarchical sensitivity simply means that you are being cautious, if you're a leader, not to impose your will on those that are trying to come up with decisions. We mentioned in critical thinking that the last thing that you want to do is come out and say, this is what I think we should do when you're trying to come up with a solution, because then you're going to limit the potential ideas that could come in. So if you're a manager, you want to make sure that you're not dissuading people because of your position and your authority. It also means that you want to weigh the recommendations and don't just dismiss them because you think that they're silly. Give people an opportunity to prove their recommendation and explain it as to why it might be a good idea. Slide 30 talks about boundary spanning. What we're talking about here is that you may have an organization that has several different departments. They often don't cross over and talk to each other sometimes, even though they should. So going across the borders or the boundaries, spanning across them, a span being like a bridge, you make a connection to another group. Ambassador activities is just basically communications that would help the team because they may be isolated somewhat themselves. They could be considered their own group, their own department within the organization. They need to be able to reach out and get the information and the support that they need so that the team can be successful. Task coordinator activities, it's pretty self-explanatory. You basically want to make sure that people are communicating all of the issues that they need to do, all of the tasks that they need to do, so that the team can rely on other functional areas. If we need input from finance to find out how much money we have, that may limit our recommendation on a decision if we don't have enough money. If we do have enough money, or at least if we know how much money we have, we can start to cater a decision in accordance with that information, but we have to have that information first. So the task coordinator would be able to deal with other groups and make sure that that information flows. Scout activities, to be a scout is simply to do research and figure things out. Someone in the team could be assigned that role to make sure that you've got the appropriate information about technology, or you're using the appropriate technology. If you're making a new product, you want to know if the competitors are already making that type of a product, or if your product may be better. And you could look at the broader marketplace as well. So when you're making that type of a decision, you need to be able to look within and without, and that's what scout activities would be. Slide 31 is just a picture to give you an illustration of what the teamwork processes may be. They talk about transition processes, action processes, transition processes, action processes, and interpersonal processes. And all of those things occur over a period of time. All of them feed into teamwork processes. So the first one on slide 32 is transition processes. We mentioned in chapter 11, I believe, it's a good idea to come up with a mission statement. Define what everybody on the team is going to do, what the objective of the team is going to be, how they're going to come about achieving that deliverable when the time comes. Strategy formulation is when you're developing the types of things that you're going to do. Contingency plans, which is to have some type of an idea what to do if something doesn't work. For example, you signed up for a class that was going to be held in a classroom, and now we can't go to the classroom. So we had to have a plan in place, which is a contingency plan, so that you could still maintain your ability to gain the information to hear this lecture, even if it may be in a less desirable format, or maybe it's more desirable, it's your call. These are the types of things that we're looking at so that you could adapt to things that change so the team could be able to succeed even if the groundwork has been shifted since the start of the team's work. Goal specification simply means that the team is going to be looking at what are the most important things that it needs to accomplish. There are nice to haves and there are have to haves. If you've got a deliverable that must include certain things, those should be prioritized, and that should be highlighted in the team's mission. Action processes are talking about the things that you're actually doing. Oftentimes when you plan a project, you will create things called milestones. A milestone literally came from colonial days in America, or even in Europe, pre-colonial days. If you were going to walk from Boston to Lexington, you didn't have GPS, you'd be walking your way along a trail, and they would literally put a stone on the side of the trail that would have how many miles you've gone. So you're at mile 3, if it's a 6-mile walk, you know you're halfway there. So the idea is that you create milestones in a process or during a project so that you could figure out where you are. List all the things that you need to do and check them off so that you know how far along the process you are. There are software applications and other systems so that you can monitor how you're doing on all of these milestones and completing the tasks that you need to do. If you ever take a class in project management, there's actually something called a critical path. So there are certain things that need to happen before another thing can happen. There are other actions that can take place independently, but you need to be able to know which ones are those critical paths, because if you don't complete them first, you may end up slowing up everything else. Certain things that can happen outside of the critical path you can work on independently, and it doesn't really matter what order you do that work, but there are certain things that you have to do. If you're building a house, you got to dig the foundation first. You have to put up the framework before you can put in the sink. So you have to have certain things taken care of. You can go buy all the equipment. That's fine. You don't need to do that in order to build a house. In fact, if you have a place to store it, you can do that pretty much whenever you need it. There still will be a time when it has to be available, but it won't be necessarily critical in terms of the sequential or chronological order in which things need to be completed. Helping behavior is simply the team members helping others to be able to do what they have to do. If somebody gets stuck or they need a little bit of assistance, the team should be willing to accommodate them to the extent that it's not going to take away from their ability to do their own job. Coordination leads to that synergy that we were talking about before, synchronizing their activities so that they're all working together at the right time. If you're playing a sport, you're running a play, somebody has to be in the right position at the right time in order for the play to work. Same idea when you're in business. You want to make sure everybody knows what they're doing and they're doing it at the right time. So coordination is really critical to avoid that production blocking that was discussed a couple of slides back. Interpersonal processes, again, this is just highlighting, putting the things that we talked about before into play, into action. You have to be able to work with other people. You have to be able to motivate and inspire confidence in the team so that they can do the work and stay focused on completing it. Oftentimes, when people are working together in close quarters, it leads to conflict. Somebody's going to be unhappy with the way something is going. Either they don't like someone's personality, the way they've been treated. They don't think they're working hard enough. They think they're not staying on point. That can lead to conflict. Resolving conflict is quite important, and tasking someone, probably the team leader, with that goal is pretty important. If you have relationship conflict, maybe you need to sit down and talk it out, make sure that everybody's on the same page. If you have task conflict, it's more of a managerial or administrative task, so that you can look at the project plan, and if things are crossing over and creating a problem for resources, you may need to revise the way things have been planned out so that the tasks do not conflict any longer. 35 has another one of those surveys for relationship conflict. On this one, the high score would have been 20. The average score here was 9. So it's a little bit less than average in terms of conflict if you look at it. If there was a lot of conflict, if there was a lot of tension, if there were personality conflicts, the score would be higher. So what this really is telling you in the survey, there is a lot of conflict. It's not a little bit and it's not a lot, but there's conflict will arise. You're going to be able to have to address it. Communication is an important aspect on teams. If they're not talking to one another, if they're not giving information to each other to let everyone else know exactly what's going on, that leads to guesswork, basically. And we mentioned before in class, if you don't have information, people either guess or they make up some kind of an answer to fill the void. And oftentimes what happens is a lack of communication leads to fear and it leads to negativity. So if I don't know something, people have a tendency to assume the worst. So the more information that you can get out to people, the better they will perform. The graphic that they have on slide 36 is just basically mapping out how information moves from one party to another. So the information on the left starts with a sender. I'm sending you the information right now and I am encoding it. I'm using the English language to encode what I have in my head to try to translate it over to you or to transmit it over to you. The message goes through some other means. In this case, it's YouTube or some other electronic form of it. There may be some noise. You may actually literally have noise. There could be cars driving by. There could be things interfering with it. If we're talking on the telephone, we could have a bad connection. It could also be that there's just a problem understanding what I said because I didn't present the information in an easily understandable way. That could be also considered some kind of a noise. When you get the message, you have to decode what you received. Hopefully you understand it, and then you can take action on the basis of the information that you've got. Issues with communication on slide 37, it can be communication or communicator issues. I may not be telling you something that you understand, or I may not be giving you enough information, or I may be telling you something that's irrelevant. Information richness goes to the idea that the more background that you can provide someone, whether it be demonstrating how to do something, I could tell you how to do it, I could show you how to do it, I could give you the equipment, I could show you a video, you could watch someone do it. If I was able to do all of those things, the information I'm providing is extraordinarily rich. If I have to tell you how to find a file on a computer over the phone, we're limited because all you can hear is my voice at the other end of the line. That information is not particularly rich, and it may be more of a challenge for you to figure out exactly how to do what we're asking you to do. Network structure simply refers to the processes and structure that you have in place to be able to get that information from one place to another, whether it be you're in an office and you have meetings, you have email, you have blogs, videos, whatever it may be. It's essentially the administrative structure that you've got to be able to get information from one party to another. Slide 38 has a graphic to show you differences in communication network structures. What they're really looking at is they're looking at either low centralization of communication or high centralization of communication. Low centralization means that everybody's talking to one another. Centralization simply means that one party is kind of running the show. You go talk to the boss, and the boss from the top down releases information. So the top two in blue, those columns or rows there, if you have, in terms of effectiveness for simple tasks, it's usually better to have centralized communication because it's something simple. The boss can probably just delegate to other people to do it. So that would be more like the Y or the wheel example. Communications may be going between people, but it usually goes to one centralized party. If you have a more complex task, it's better to have decentralized or a higher level of decentralization. So that would be the all-channel and circle versions of network structures so that you could all talk together. Usually if something is more complicated, no one person is going to be able to figure out a really complicated issue. So having cross communication would be more useful than just having one person being kind of in control. Team states is on slide 39, talking about cohesion, potency, mental models, and transactive memory. They all lead to team states. And on slide 40, they're going to talk about cohesion. And groupthink is something that we mentioned before, but I'll talk a little bit more about it right now. I think it was chapter 11 that we talked about having a devil's advocate. The whole point of having a devil's advocate is to avoid groupthink. When you have a team that is really working well together, that's what you're looking for. However, while a cohesive group is what you're looking for, there can be too much of a good thing. If your group is so cohesive and bonded that they don't really pay attention to any information from the outside, or its members are worried about raising issues that could be problematic because they don't want to let down the group, then you could end up with something called groupthink. I think I mentioned the example in class several weeks ago about the Bay of Pigs. The Bay of Pigs was an invasion of Cuba that was planned, I believe, around 1961 or 2 during the Kennedy administration. And the idea was to get people who had been recent emigres from Cuba, train them by the CIA, and send them back to Cuba to try and overthrow the regime of Fidel Castro. It was a complete failure, and it didn't really, in hindsight, if you look at it, it didn't really have much of an opportunity to work. Kennedy actually had meetings with people in his cabinet, and he said, why did it go so badly? Why did we do this? It looks so stupid. And the rest of the people in the room looked around and said, I thought you wanted to do it. So it's almost like a peer pressure thing. When you bond with a group and you have a lot of similarities, you don't want to let the group down. You may end up making bad decisions and going with a bad decision. As we mentioned in chapter 11, having a devil's advocate, someone assigned that job to do so, would give him the license to just say what he wants. If this is not a good decision, why don't we think of something else? And because they've been delegated as a devil's advocate, people won't be taking it personally. They won't be getting upset with it because that's that person's job. If they didn't do it, they wouldn't be doing what they were assigned to do. So making sure the group works together is great. Make sure that they don't work so well together that they are blind to problems that might arise because of the cohesion that they've developed. Slide 41 has a survey for a cohesion assessment. Again, some of these questions are kind of the opposite. So if you see which ones are bolded, I think what you're supposed to do is flip the score. Otherwise, you'd get a weird answer. So there's 8 questions, 7 potential grades that they could get. The high score would be 56 if you gave the max for each. So the first question is, I interact with my teammates either in person or virtually to get the work done. If that was great, you'd give it a 7. On number 4, I dislike my teammates. If it's to a very small extent, you actually have to give it instead of a 1, you have to give it a 7 to make it make sense. So they're asking, I don't know why they didn't just word the comment or the question a little bit differently so that you wouldn't have to reverse the score. But the average score was 45 out of 56. So the people that they had surveyed tended to be pretty happy with the cohesion of the teams that they were working on. On 42, they mentioned the term potency. To be potent means that you're effective or that you have a strong capacity to do something. Medication that is potent, you take it, it works. That's where it really comes down to. So here we're talking about the degree to which the team's members think that they can actually work in a situation and be effective. A team with a level of cohesion, they will probably, after they start doing some work, begin to believe that they can do the work and they have a high level of potency. Slide 43, it's kind of self-explanatory. You can just read it yourself. Transactive memory on slide 44. Transactive refers to transactions, things that happen, interacting with another party to get something done. So if I have specialized knowledge, say law, and the team that I'm working on, I have to make sure that I can give that information transactionally to another member of the team because they need it. And when I bring up something that the rest of the team might not have known, once I explain it to them, now they know too. So you can almost get like a memory or a history of the team that can start building on that. Somebody else may know information about accounting or marketing that I didn't know. And when they explain why it's important for our team, they're transacting that information. They're giving it to me. They're giving it to the team. And now it's not just one person's knowledge. It's everybody's knowledge, and the team can employ it to be able to be successful. Transactive memory, again, is another survey here on slide 45. You can just take a look at that and look at the average score. So how well does teamwork processes have an effect on performance and commitment? On slide 46, again, we're looking at correlation. So if you have a team process, if you've got a good team process in place, the mechanisms that you're doing, how well is that related to performance? And there is at least a moderate correlation, so it does have some contribution to a successful team. The thing that really is a boost here, though, is team commitment. So if you have a good process where people think that they have a situation where they can listen to others, they can be listened to, and they can work together, the commitment to the team has a very strong correlation. So if you've got a good process, the team will be committed. And again, it may not be as much of an impact on performance, but you want to have a team that has good commitment. That usually leads to good performance. I would not be at all surprised if you had a poor process and the team commitment was very low, the team performance would be even lower. So that's all we have for Chapter 12. We're going to be looking at Chapter 13. That is either going to be another YouTube or hopefully by this Thursday, I may be able to get something, whether it be WebEx or Zoom or something through Moodle, so that we can do a live class. Thanks.